So how do you measure training programs? Even experienced trainers look at it with a little bit of suspicion, like maybe it can't be done, or it's some sort of weird science or magical art form. Some trainers use quizzes to assess whether or not their training programs are effective, but I think even they know that quizzes have some limitations. So I'm joined today by Alexander Salas. He is the Chief of Awesomeness at eLearning Launch. And we're going to talk about quizzes and whether or not we should use those to evaluate training. So, Alexander, true or false? A quiz is an effective way to measure a training program.
Oh, that's great. We're going to use a quiz question for that, huh? Okay. Well, I guess we'll comply. It's a 50-50 chance though, so I guess, even I can guess, right, if it's right or wrong. So, no, I'll say it's false. Well, it depends on the case, obviously. We can't just throw, a blank statement. Now, in terms of workplace learning, you have to think deeply into this. You have to ask yourself that question. You have to question yourself. Okay, if you are providing a quiz, what is that quiz doing? Why are people taking a quiz? Is it because they need to remember something? Is it because they need to do something at work? So if your logic is, hey, I'm going to give you a quiz today, so 2 weeks later when you start your job, you are going to remember the quiz answer, and then you're going to be able to do your job. All right, well, that's your logic. That's great, but it sounds kind of crazy to me.
So let's unpack that a little bit. I think you brought up a couple of things that are really important. One of which is, what do we want people to do? And often it's not that we want them to memorize something, that we want them to do something with information.
Right.
And if that's what we want them to do, and the answer to the question, true or false, it's generally false. The quiz isn't the right way to measure it. What should we be doing instead if we want to determine if we've trained someone or not?
Well, the main thing in anything that you start, I mean, there's the obvious stuff that people usually say, and there's some kind of dogma that people have in the industry in L&D, which is like, no, you have to align to the business, and you have to align this, and you have to align that. Okay, great. Ideally, what you want to do is understand exactly what is your purpose and what is it that you're doing as a trainer, learning professional, instructional designer. What is your scope? Where are you ending? Where, is it something where you're just giving people information and then you let it go? Is the manager's problem whether a person does it or not? Or do you want to help that situation or not? So in terms of using a quiz, if you are an instructional designer, let's say, or learning professional in a higher ed business, it makes complete sense that you give a quiz because that's what you expect the student to do. You expect the student to take an exam at the end, which is what? A bigger version of a quiz. So they can study and remember and whatnot. But we have to make that connection though, right? We all went to school. We went to school over 20 years or so. Even if you went, if you went higher ed, 20, 24 years, right? From the beginning, you're going through school, and school teaches you to take a test, take an exam, pass the exam. So you cram for the exam, you prepare for the exam, which is only one event. And then if you are successful, you do well at that event, at that exam, you pass it. What do you do the day after? You immediately dump all that because your brain, even just biologically, you're saying, I don't need this. So what am I remembering this for? So is that going to work in the workplace? Ideally, if you're going to do a quiz, then do a quiz where people have to know where to find what they need to get a job done, to get the information done, but not specifically the subject in play.
So
So
let's
what do you
say
do? Yeah, go
let's take
ahead.
something concrete. Let's say I've hired people to work in a warehouse, and my company fulfills online orders, and these people will take whatever the order is and actually find the item in the warehouse, pick it off the shelf, and send it down to the shipping department. And they probably need to know where things are located in the warehouse, they probably need to know how to pick them, how to route them to the shipping department, etc. If we're saying a quiz maybe is not the best way to assess that knowledge that they need, how would I know if I've trained them properly to do their job?
It's a great question, and it's a great way that we're talking in the specifics, because that's something that we don't get to do in the industry too much. So I think the primary thing we want to differentiate is whether you're assessing capability, you're assessing the skill, or you are providing a multiple choice quiz, or a quiz for that matter, right? A written test. So I think that argument, the main point of argument is that you don't want to do what schools do. You don't want to do what a college does, because then you're just acting like a version of a college. But if you want to solve that problem that you're mentioning there's a couple of conditions we need to know. And the conditions will be, do we have the capability of people actually walking the space and knowing where things are at, right? And then having the ability to practice that same scenario, having the ability to actually practice what's going to happen at work. So not so much, hey, take this test and then we'll see what happens when you have a situation, but more of, hey, I've been here before. The first time, maybe I may not get it right, but I've been here before. This looks familiar. This is maybe what it is. Let me get there. So, we tend to think that because we're providing an event that guarantees performance and we're done. That's apparently what we like to think, but there's more to that. So, in terms of what can you do, you could provide some visual cues. You can provide content. Let's say people cannot walk the space. There's no opportunity for you to walk the space. Well, that's when you probably want to take advantage of video, or want to take advantage of things that provide sort of a realistic view of the space that they are supposed to be familiar with.
Well, and I think you're touching on something which is really important. As an instructional designer, if I get to pick, the way I assess whether or not that warehouse employee knows how to do their job is I'm going to give them an order and have them pick the order. They have to use whatever knowledge and skills they've been given in training to find where the item's located, to correctly pick it off the shelf, to correctly route it to the shipping department. And if they can do that, so many times with so much accuracy, that's a very valid assessment. You raise an issue, though, I think that is very important. In some cases, I don't have access to that warehouse. There's too much going on. Maybe it's a new facility. I recall a certain time where I had to train employees on a new machine that they were going to use on the job. Only problem, the machine hadn't been installed yet. And so, the manager wanted me to do classroom training. I said, we're going to go in the workshop where the technicians are working, and they've got a prototype machine that they're working on. We're going to do all the training there with the prototype. It's not the best environment, but it's the closest to the work. And I wonder if you find that that's a challenge a lot of times, is getting the training as close to the work as possible so we can actually see them do the job.
Well, yeah, in workplace learning, that's essential. I mean, you can't shy away from that. If you are, then again, you're going back to the whole academic model, which is like, hey, study this, really study it. And, that's not really how many people work, go to work. Like if, when I've been an instructional designer in enterprises, I don't go to work to go learn a bunch of stuff, like sit there and read learning theory or something else, right? Like, suspected that I know some things. So if I'm doing some kind of procedure, what's going to help me is, first of all, ensure that the workplace is not just relying on training or learning and development for me to do my job. There should be informational resources that I can access and that I know where they're located, right? And that, we can never replace uh, work processes with training. It shouldn't be, if you're using training to replace that, you have a problem. And the problem is a business center problem. It's not really an L&D problem. So if I have resources, in my case, I'm an educated person. I have master's degrees. I've done the job already for over 10 years. Are you going to take me to a classroom to learn how to do my job? That's going to be insulting to me. Yeah, I need to learn how you do it in the company. Great. where are your resources? Where can I find, information that will guide me in the way that lets me adjust to how you do it in this company, right?
You bring up something else though, Alexander, that I think is important. I think as trainers, we have this mindset that our domain is the classroom, whether it's a physical classroom or it's an e-learning environment or it's some sort of controlled event. And I'm just realizing as a trainer myself, my entire career, I've never looked at it that way. And so here's what I mean when you say like on the job, for example, or when I the example I gave earlier of training people in the workshop because that's where the machine was located at the moment before it was installed. I've always looked at the trainer as a trainer. My domain is where the training is happening, and if it's close to work, perfect. And if it's farther from work, then I maybe have to get creative. But is that common for trainers that they look their domain is the classroom and work is work and the classroom is theirs? Is that part of the
Well,
struggle?
you're starting to open a can of worms, and we can definitely get all.
We were talking about quizzes, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, no, we can get all entomologic about it. But yeah, it's so you're addressing different issues there. I mean, if I was going to, I have views on that, and the views are that L&D practices what L&D likes to practice. So the trainer, the facilitator, well, two differences, right? and and we talk terms today. If you say trainer, people are like, oh my god, trainer, what do you mean? Learning professional, so learner trainer, you and I understand what training means, and you and I understand the value of training and what a trainer is. So if it's a good trainer, if you're a good trainer, you are looking at performance and business center approaches. If you want to be an academic based or academia based practitioner that just wants to run a school and a business, then you are doing the whole, you got to come to classroom, you have to do the course, you have to do the quiz. And therefore, you want, that's what happens in academia, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what happens in academia? You go, they still have lectures. It's 2020. We still have lectures. And that's because it's a business model. That's the only way they can sit about 50 people in a room. Well, not anymore because of COVID. But again, if COVID wasn't happening, we'll be back to our old ways, right? So, yeah, we have a challenge there. L&D likes to do what it likes to do. If you tell L&D that they cannot have an LMS anymore, what would they do? If you tell L&D that they cannot have ILT anymore, what would they do? How would they adapt? It's hard to say.
And for my audience that's listening and you're wondering L&D, so Alexander, a lot of my audience, they're customer service professionals. They still call it training. That's what I call it.
Yeah.
Learning LMS, learning management system, ILT, instructor-led
Oh
training.
yeah. And throwing all
But it's
acronyms
easy for us to start nerding out on this. It's funny you mentioned the kind of academic-based model. Almost 20 years ago, I found myself managing a corporate university, and it was set up exactly that way. We had programs, and we even called them like your bachelor's and your master's, and
mm-hmm.
it was kind of ridiculous, but it was an easier sell to executives that we could structure it that way. We had a facility. It was a really nice thing. What I noticed, I'm a data guy, and as a data guy, what I noticed is that the people who were advancing through all of our programs were not necessarily our most successful leaders. Some were, but other people would never set foot on at our corporate university and were absolutely killing it. And I asked myself, what's the difference? And it was all about capability. And
mm.
when we started, I broke the model completely. So we're not doing this university stuff anymore. We're going to focus on capability. And at first, it was a little bit of a hard sell from a budget perspective. But once the results started coming in and executives could see what we were doing, they embraced it. And I wonder if that's, I could see it going back to the roots of quizzing. We didn't do any quizzes anymore. The biggest metric I had as a learning leader was, did I have people who are ready to be promoted or not? Do we
Right.
have to hire from within or do we have to go externally? That was the metric. That was a business metric that evaluated my leadership program.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an evolution, right, that you want professionals to go through. If they're beginners and they're in customer service training programs, You want them to, yeah, you want them to perform at a specific standard level that you have, but then you want them to progress and to a level in which they start creating their own improvements to the workflow, improvements to what they do at work. So yeah, it's if you start with the mindset of saying, and I get it, the business end, if you think about business people, they ask you for training because that's what they know, right? Based on their experience. And who are they? They're people that, just like you, they went through school. So they thought, okay, well, if I want to do a specific job, I go to school for it. And so what is school called in the business world? Training, you know, for the business people, right? It's like, no, you got to go to training. So there's a lot of, the interesting part of all of this, you and I can talk about this. And the message that I give people is, look, you're new in the industry and you didn't take a degree or anything like that, and you just landed the job and you're an instructional designer or training professional, whatever the case is, question everything. Make sure that your business center, and you could be learner center all you want, but again, that's going back to the whole teaching and student based things. Teachers have 8 weeks or a semester with student, and that's why they do learner center stuff, student center stuff, right? Because you spend all that time with that, but you don't have that luxury when you do workplace learning. So if you leave the business behind, then what are you really doing for the organization? You're not really doing much.
I want to touch on something else I think that you brought up, which is businesses are asking for training often because that's kind of how they view the problem. In my experience, it's only later that the leader will say, "Well, how was the training? Did it succeed? Did it not?" I feel like that's a bit of a trap because if we don't have clear objectives going in, and it's not necessarily a good solution or the only solution, and then at the end we're asked to justify what we just did, um, telling everybody that they liked the training where X% of the people participated doesn't really solve the business case, to your point. What
Yeah.
should trainers do when they get that initial request? Say, go do 2 hours of training on this topic. What should they be doing to ensure they don't fall into that trap later on where they're then asked to justify how well that solution worked?
Yeah, well, the thing about it is, this has been going on for decades, right? So people can get away. L&D is the only entity in the business, I think, that is always having that complex with itself. I think the business doesn't really care. Like, the business is going along its day. L&D is all neurotic, and they're like, oh, how do I prove that what I did is impactful? So, and of course, that makes sense. You want to see that your work has an impact. But if you are doing the metrics that are school based, you're doing the stuff that we talked about, completions, scores, right? That's all school based. When you go to a school, a college, that's what they worry about, right? Hey, did they pass a test? Did they take the course? Did they score well? Did they not score well? That type of thing. So beyond that, then if we're talking workplace learning, if we're talking people being able to do what they can do, I think they should have, instead of universities, they should have performance institutes, like their own little performance institutes. And then the question that you pose when you get that request of, hey, we need training, is what do you want out of the training? Do you want performance or do you want knowledge? What, and let people make the choices. Sometimes if you explain and they show people how stupid it can be, or how dumb the thing is, then they'll realize, oh, no, 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 yeah, no, okay, yeah, we'll do what you need to do, right? But yeah, it's a thing of, you need to find out from that person, okay, great, absolutely, what do you want to get out of that? Like, what is your expectation, right? Because if you want me to show you a bunch of completions and test scores, we can do that all day, that's no problem. But if you say, hey, we want to increase sales by 20% and people don't know this product and they're not closing, you know, so what you want is 20% increase because people need to close more deals. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we'll take care of that, right? And then you approach it in that manner.
I think that's so key that we got to go back, push back just a little bit on our stakeholders to say, what do you want to see as a result of this? Alexander, we could probably talk all day about training and evaluation. I think we have time maybe for just one more question.
Okay.
For trainers who are just starting out and they're just starting to explore, how do I evaluate and assess learning? What is one thing that you would advise that they do?
Primarily, understand the environment you're going to be working at and what is your role. So if you're going to be working in academia, then great, follow everything that all the networks are telling you, ATD and whatever, because that's usually a lot of school-based stuff. But if you are going to be really concerned with how people perform in the business, then follow people that are talking about that. And you may have to step out of L&D, to be honest. So, I mean, the interesting thing is that, the good news is that you have over 40 some years of systems approach to training, documentation, and knowledge out there that is not often spoke about in these networks that we're talking about. So look up systems approach to training. Started in the 70s. That's what led up to what most people talk about ADDIE. You know what the ADDIE model is, which we already done the research. It's not a model, all that good jazz. Newsflash. But you want to also look up a name. The name is Gary Rumler, and this was a gentleman that was genius in the 80s, in the late 70s and the 80s. He ran a lot of successful intervention performance programs for big companies. And today you can follow another guy. His name is Guy Wallace. And he has a trove of stuff that he has collected on human performance technology. So be focused on performance and business results. Don't be focused on academic pursuits.
So performance and business results, that's what gets me excited. That's why I enjoy about
Yeah.
training. Alexander, if people want to learn more about you, find more about some of the content that you provide, I found you through some of the great content you're posting on LinkedIn. How do they find you? How do they track you down?
Well, LinkedIn is one. The name usually is going by Style Learn. That was my e-learning. That's my e-learning consulting business, and I do provide e-learning consulting services and performance-based services. But I also run the academy as Chief of Awesomeness of e-learning Launch, and that's actually to help people become instructional designers or instructional systems developers. Learning specific tools, techniques, and obviously good foundational performance-based training. So you can find me there at StyleLearn in Twitter, at StyleLearn in Instagram, and on LinkedIn.
Right on. Alexander, thanks for your time today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you so much.